Story 1. Something was following the boat. I grew up around the ocean. My father was a commercial fisherman, and by the time I was 16, I'd already spent more nights at sea than most people ever would in their lives. The ocean didn't scare me. At least I didn't think it did. This happened about 7 years ago when I was working deckhand on a small fishing vessel off the coast of Alaska. Nothing fancy, just me, the captain, and one other guy. We were about 12 miles offshore when the fog rolled in. It didn't drift in slowly either. One minute we could see the horizon, and the next the world ended about 20 feet from the bow. That's when the sonar started acting strange. At first it showed something deep beneath us, big but far down. We didn't think much of it. Then it started rising. Slowly. The captain assumed it was a school of fish. But schools don't stay perfectly centered under a boat. Whatever this was, followed us. Every time we changed direction, it adjusted, always directly below. After about 40 minutes, the sonar alarm went off. The depth indicator spiked. The thing was close now. That's when the third guy on board said something I still think about. He said, "Why does it feel like we're the ones being watched?" A few seconds later, something brushed against the hull. Not a bump, not a strike, a slow drag. We cut the engines and sat in silence. Whatever was beneath us stopped moving too. When the fog finally lifted an hour later, the sonar screen was empty. But none of us slept that night. The light that followed the boat. The first time we saw the light, we thought it was another vessel. We were 3 nights out, far enough from shore that radio chatter had faded into static. The ocean was flat, black, and quiet in a way that makes you feel like sound itself has been swallowed. Just after midnight, a pale white glow appeared off our starboard side. Not bright, not flashing, just there. It stayed the same distance no matter how fast we went. We increased speed. The light matched us. We slowed. It slowed. There was no engine noise, no wake. Just a smooth, steady glow gliding over the water like it wasn't touching it at all. One of the crew joked that it was probably some kind of deep-sea organism. Nobody laughed. After an hour, the light drifted closer, close enough that we could see it wasn't floating above the water. It was coming from below. That's when the radio turned on by itself. No voice, just breathing. Slow, wet, like something struggling to inhale through water. We cut the engine and went dark. The light passed directly beneath us, illuminating the hull from below. For a split second, we saw a shape in the glow. It was long, too long, and it turned its head upward, like it knew we were watching. When the light finally faded, the radio went silent. We didn't speak until sunrise. Story 2. The man who knocked from underneath. I worked cargo ships for almost a decade. You get used to strange things at sea, sounds, shadows, dreams that don't feel like dreams. This one still wakes me up. We were anchored overnight during a storm delay. Heavy rain, rough water. Everyone was ordered below deck. Around 2 a.m., there was a knocking sound, slow, rhythmic, coming from beneath the ship. At first, we thought it was loose cargo or debris hitting the hull, but the sound was too deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks again. Someone joked that it sounded like a person knocking on a door. That's when the knocking moved. It traveled along the underside of the ship, following us as we walked across the deck above. Then it stopped directly beneath the crew quarters, and the knocking changed. It became scratching, long nails dragging across metal. We called it in over the radio. The response came back confused. There was nothing in the water, no divers, no debris. Then a voice came through the hull, muffled, distant, wrong. It was saying a name, my name. The captain ordered full departure immediately. As the engine started, the scratching turned frantic. Whatever was down there didn't want us to leave. When we finally pulled away, the sound vanished. The next morning, we found hand-shaped dents in the steel hull from the outside. The depth where nothing drifts. There is a stretch of ocean that doesn't behave like the rest. No currents, no drifting debris, no birds. Sailors don't mark it on maps because there's nothing to mark. The water looks normal at first glance, flat and dark, But if you stay long enough, you realize something is wrong. Nothing moves unless it wants to. We entered that area 3 nights into a research voyage. Engine steady, instruments stable, crew quiet. The sea was calm enough to reflect the stars perfectly, like a mirror that went on forever. Then the reflection stopped. The stars above were still there, but the water below no longer showed them. It was black in a way I've never seen before. Not shadow, not depth, just absence. We slowed the ship. The first thing we noticed was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. No waves against the hull, no wind through cables. Even the engine seemed muffled, like the noise was being swallowed before it could echo. That's when the sonar started returning false readings. Depth markers jumped wildly, thousands of meters, then nothing at all, as if the signal had simply vanished. We dropped a probe. It descended normally at first, the cable feeding out smoothly. 500 meters, 1,000, 2,000. Then the tension disappeared. The cable went slack. The probe hadn't snapped free. It hadn't hit bottom. It had stopped pulling, as if something below had taken its weight. The monitors flickered. For a brief moment, the probe's camera activated. It showed water. Endless, dark water. Then shapes began to appear at the edge of the frame. Not swimming, waiting. The feed cut out. We tried to reel the probe back in. The cable came up clean, perfectly severed. The cut was smooth, like it had been sliced with something impossibly sharp. That night no one slept. We took turns watching the water, staring into that black surface that reflected nothing back. The longer you looked, the more it felt like the ocean wasn't empty. It felt occupied. Just before dawn, the ship tilted. Not violently, just enough to notice, as if something massive had brushed against the hull far below. Then the knocking started. Not metal on metal, not impact. Pressure, slow, deliberate pulses traveling up through the ship, vibrating through the floors and into our bones, each one spaced evenly apart, like a signal. The captain ordered engines to full. They responded late, too late. The water beside us began to rise, not splashing, not surging, rising smoothly, bulging upward like something enormous was pushing from underneath. The surface broke, but nothing came out. Instead, the water itself bent inward, forming a vast, curved depression, as if gravity had shifted locally. At the center of it, the darkness deepened, and something opened its eyes. They were not eyes as we understand them. No pupils, no color. Just vast, pale shapes embedded in the dark, impossibly far apart. They did not blink. They looked through us. The pressure on the hull intensified. Alarms screamed. Systems failed one by one. And then a voice came through the speakers. Not through the radio, through the ship. It didn't use sound. It used vibration, a feeling that bypassed the ears entirely. It told us we were drifting, that nothing should drift there, that we were not supposed to float above it. The captain screamed orders that no one could hear. Then the pressure vanished. The water relaxed. The surface flattened. The reflection of the stars returned like nothing had happened. Our engines roared back to life. We fled. Days later, when we reached port, inspectors found something carved into the underside of the hull. Deep grooves, arranged in a pattern none of us recognized. But every single one of us dreamed the same dream that night. An endless dark, a weight beneath us, and the certainty that whatever lives there did not lose interest. It simply let us go. The vessel that arrived without anyone on board. The harbor master swore the ship requested permission to dock. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. It was just before dawn when the call came in, a cargo vessel identifying itself by name, giving precise coordinates, requesting clearance to enter port. The voice over the radio was calm, professional, and distorted only slightly by distance. Everything about it sounded routine, except no such ship was scheduled to arrive. Radar picked it up moments later, a large vessel moving steadily toward the harbor at low speed, engines running, navigation lights active, course perfectly aligned. We watched it approach from the pier, no crew visible on deck. As it passed beneath the harbor lights, the ship looked wrong. Not damaged, not derelict, just empty. Windows dark, no movement behind the glass. The engines cut as it coasted in. Lines were thrown. No one was there to throw them. The ship drifted to a stop anyway, settling against the dock with practiced precision, like it had docked itself 1,000 times before. Boarding was ordered immediately. I went with the inspection team. The moment my boot touched the deck, I felt it. The silence wasn't natural, not the quiet of an empty place, but the kind that presses in on your ears, as if sound itself has been removed. The deck was clean, maintained. Recent footprints led from the bow toward the bridge, but they stopped abruptly. Inside, lights flickered on as we passed, one corridor at a time, like the ship was waking up to us. Doors hung open. Chairs were pushed back from tables mid-meal. Coffee cups sat cold, untouched. No signs of struggle, no signs of evacuation. The logbook was open on the bridge. The last entry wasn't dated. It simply read, "We are still here." We searched the crew quarters next. Bunks were neatly made. Personal items remained. Photos of families. Letters never sent. Every cabin felt occupied, even though no one was there. The air was thick with presence, like walking through a room where someone had just been standing moments before. Then the sound started. Footsteps. Not ours. Slow. Heavy. Moving below deck. We froze. The footsteps stopped when we did. When we moved again, they followed. Always one level beneath us. We reached the engine room. The engines were warm, running, maintaining idle speed, with no one at the controls. That's when the radio crackled to life. The same voice from earlier came through the ship's speakers. It thanked us for helping them arrive. Said they couldn't dock on their own anymore. The temperature dropped instantly. Condensation formed on the walls, trailing downward like something unseen had brushed past them. Shadows stretched where there should have been light. Then we saw them, figures standing at the far end of the corridor. Dozens of them, faint, translucent, wearing uniforms stained with seawater and rust, faces slack, eyes open but unfocused. They didn't move toward us. They watched, waiting. The voice spoke again. It said the ship had gone down months ago. A storm, a fire, a slow sinking far from any shipping lane. No survivors, no distress signal answered. But they didn't leave. They stayed with the ship as it filled with water, clinging to decks and rails, refusing to let go. And something else had noticed. Something beneath the wreck. Something that listened. The voice explained that whatever lived below had learned how to move the ship by listening to the echoes of the dead. Learned how to follow their memories, their routines. Learned how to bring them back to places filled with people. The lights went out. Emergency lighting cast long red shadows across the corridor. The figures stepped forward in unison. Their feet never touched the floor. We ran. Behind us, the ship groaned like a living thing stretching after a long sleep. Metal screamed. The water around the hull began to churn violently. We barely made it back to the dock. As the last of us stepped off, the ship's lines released themselves. The vessel pulled away from the pier. Engines surged. It turned back toward open water. As it disappeared into the fog, the radio crackled one final time. The voice sounded tired. It said, "We tried to stay empty, but the sea doesn't like being alone." The ship was never seen again. But sometimes, late at night, incoming vessels report a shape drifting just beyond radar range, waiting for permission to dock. The crew that never abandoned ship. The distress signal came from a location that didn't make sense. It was too close to shore to have gone unnoticed, yet no ship had been reported missing in the area. The signal itself was old-fashioned, sent on a frequency most modern vessels no longer used. Weak, repetitive, and oddly precise, as if someone had carefully timed it. We were the closest patrol, so we responded. As we approached the coordinates, the sea grew unnaturally still. Waves flattened out until the water resembled dark glass. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, gusting once before fading entirely. Then we saw the ship. It was anchored, perfectly. A large passenger vessel sat motionless on the water, lights glowing warmly through its windows. From a distance it looked alive, safe, almost inviting. But there were no lifeboats deployed, no smoke, no movement. The ship's name was visible on the bow. None of us recognized it. We hailed them on the radio. No response. As we drew closer, we began to hear music drifting across the water. Faint, old-fashioned, the kind you'd expect at a formal dinner, not on a ship that had been silently anchored for who knew how long. Boarding was authorized. The moment we stepped onto the deck, the music stopped. The air felt heavy, thick with moisture and something else I couldn't place. The lights inside flickered, then stabilized, as if reacting to our presence. Inside the main hall, tables were set, meals untouched. Candles burned low but steady, wax frozen mid-drip like time had paused around them. Then we saw the passengers. They sat in their seats perfectly upright. Dozens of them, hundreds. Still, at first glance they looked alive. Eyes open, faces calm, some even smiling faintly. But none of them breathed. We moved closer. Their skin was pale and translucent, veins faintly visible beneath the surface. Salt crystals clung to their clothing, embedded deep as if they had spent time underwater. One of them turned its head, slowly. The sound of joints moving echoed through the hall like creaking ropes. Then another turned, then another. Soon all of them were facing us. A voice spoke from somewhere above. It wasn't amplified. It didn't need to be. It resonated through the ship itself. It explained that there had been an accident, a collision at night, a sudden breach below the waterline. The ship sank faster than expected. Some drowned quickly, others didn't. They stayed. They held their breath longer than they should have been able to, longer than anyone alive could manage. And when the water filled the ship completely, something else filled the space they left behind. The voice said the sea doesn't take everyone all at once. Sometimes it keeps what it likes. The passengers began to stand. They moved stiffly like bodies unused to gravity. Water pooled beneath their feet, though the floor was dry. Doors closed on their own, lights dimmed. The voice told us the ship could no longer move on its own, that it needed help reaching places where new people gathered, places full of warmth, full of breath. We ran. As we fled toward the deck, hands brushed past us, cold, heavy, pulling gently, not violently, like they were asking to be taken along. Behind us, the music resumed, faster now, desperate. We reached our boat just as the passenger vessel's anchor lifted itself from the sea. The ship began to drift forward, not away from shore, toward it. We cut our lines and reversed hard. As we pulled back, we watched figures fill the decks, standing shoulder to shoulder, staring silently toward the lights of the coastline. The ship vanished into the fog minutes later. No wreckage was ever found. But weeks later, a cruise liner docked early in the morning reported something strange. Passengers woke to find wet footprints in the hallways, leading toward the exits. The channel where ships stop answering. There is a narrow stretch of water sailors avoid even though it adds hours to the journey to go around it. It doesn't look dangerous on charts. No reefs, no shallow depths, no history of storms. Officially, it's just another shipping channel. Unofficially, it's where radios go quiet. We entered the channel just after sunset. The sky was clear, the sea calm, the kind of night captains usually appreciate. The lighthouse on the far end blinked steadily, its beams sweeping across the water in slow, predictable arcs. About 10 minutes in, our radio cut out. Not static, not interference. Silence. We checked connections, power levels, backup systems. Everything was functioning perfectly. But no matter what frequency we switched to, nothing came through. Not even background noise. It was like the air itself had stopped carrying sound. That's when we noticed the other ships. They were everywhere. Tankers, fishing boats, cargo ships. Dozens of them, scattered across the channel at irregular intervals. Some sat at anchor, others drifted slowly, turning just enough to suggest movement without direction. None of them had lights on. We tried signaling with our horn. The sound died instantly, swallowed before it could echo. As we passed the first ship, we saw figures standing along its rail. They didn't wave. They didn't move. They just watched. Their outlines were pale against the dark hull, faintly luminous, like moonlight trapped inside human shapes. Faces were indistinct, blurred, as if the details had been washed away. Someone whispered that they looked waterlogged. Another ship drifted closer, then another. They moved without wakes, gliding smoothly across the surface like reflections that had come loose from what they were meant to mirror. Our engines began to struggle, not failing, just resisting. Each turn of the propellers felt heavier, like pushing through something thick and unseen. The water around us darkened, taking on a depth that felt wrong for how shallow the channel should have been. The lighthouse beam stopped moving. It froze mid-sweep, illuminating a section of water directly ahead of us. In that light, we saw the truth. The sea wasn't empty between the ships. It was full. Shapes pressed just beneath the surface. Hundreds of them. Bodies suspended in the water, upright, unmoving, their feet dangling into depths that didn't exist on any chart. Some wore uniforms from different eras. Some wore modern life vests. Others wore nothing but the weight of the water that held them in place. Their mouths were open, not screaming, waiting. A voice came through the ship, not over the radio, through the metal. It spoke slowly, carefully, like it was choosing words it hadn't used in a long time. It said this channel was once a shortcut, a place captains rushed through to save time, a place where mistakes were made in fog, in exhaustion, in storms no one remembered afterward. Ships sank here, people drowned here, and they didn't drift away. The voice explained that the current below didn't carry bodies outward. It carried them inward, kept them. The ships around us began to turn in unison, their bows aligning toward the center of the channel. Toward us, figures on their decks stepped forward. Some raised their hands. Others simply leaned over the rails, water dripping endlessly from their sleeves. The voice said the channel needed replacement vessels, that the old ones had grown tired. Our engines screamed as we forced them to full power. The resistance lessened suddenly, as if something had decided to let us go. The lighthouse beam resumed its sweep. The ships began to fade, dissolving into mist and shadow. The figures slipped back into the water without a splash. We burst out of the channel moments later. The radio crackled back to life instantly, flooded with overlapping signals from distant ships and ports. Behind us, the channel looked normal, empty. But weeks later, maritime authorities quietly updated navigation advisories. They warned of intermittent signal loss in that area. They didn't mention the ships. They didn't mention the figures. They didn't mention that sometimes, late at night, vessels passing near the channel received brief radio transmissions. Voices asking for clearance. Voices that never state a ship name, only how long they've been waiting. The signal beneath the waves. The signal came through just once, a short burst of static followed by a voice so faint we almost missed it. It didn't give a ship name. It didn't ask for help. It just said, "We're still down here." The coordinates pointed to open water. No wrecks listed, no missing vessels. Still, we diverted. When we arrived, the sea was calm, too calm. The surface barely moved, like it was holding its breath. Our sonar activated automatically. At first, it showed nothing. Then a shape appeared below us. Not a ship. Too large. Too uneven. It looked like a mass of debris pressed together, metal fused with something organic. The outline shifted slightly as if adjusting itself. Then voices came through the speakers. Not one. Many. Overlapping. Whispering. Speaking at different speeds, different tones. Some sounded young, some old. Some didn't sound human at all. They talked about darkness, about pressure, about how long it had been since they felt air. The sonar image changed. Shapes separated from the mass and drifted upward. Human-sized, upright, slowly rising. The water around our hull grew colder. Frost crept along the railings. The engine stuttered like it was being pulled downward. One of the voices became clear. It said they hadn't sunk all at once. They'd held on. They'd waited. And something below had listened. We cut power and went silent. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the voices stopped. The sonar went blank. When we restarted the engines and pulled away, the sea returned to normal. Later, back on shore, we reviewed the recording. The signal wasn't a distress call, it was a response, sent because someone, somewhere, had finally answered them first.